What is up, my Planet Coaster friends? Johnny5 Alive here, and we are back with another episode of Yeti Land. And in today's episode, we're going to be doing some triggered events and lighting to our Darla coaster. So stay tuned and let's check it out. Alright, so getting right into it, we are doing times 10 speed because this is quite a painful process, as you can see there by me placing lights. I don't want to have you guys just watching me place lights and set up triggers for 2 hours. Actually, this actually took me like 6 hours, I think. Anyways, at times 10 speed, it's going to be all done in about half an hour. So how long would that be? 5 hours. So it's roughly about 5 hours to get these triggered events set up. So because we're at such a high speed here, I'm going to do my best to teach you guys something about triggered events as we go. Sorry if the camera's a bit jarring at this speed. It is what it is. Hopefully you guys enjoy the episode regardless. I will try to make it as entertaining as possible and explain what I'm doing along the way. So what I'm doing here is I'm just placing lights on the bottom of the track. There's a certain point where it allows you to place it on the track itself, right underneath it, and that way the whole track glows up all the way to the end. So yeah, I'm just going through and placing all the lights down because we're going to want to trigger those. So the idea behind this is we want like a blue light following the coaster, but also just in front of the coaster, so as the coaster is going along the track, it sort of has a light following it, so it gives you that whole rainbow road effect. We saw this technique being used in the what was it, the something zero, Return to Zero. I called it Park of the Year last year, and that was only used in certain parts of the track. I'm going the full way and doing the entire track. So I had no idea what I was getting into, and I really didn't have any idea how it was done. You know, I had the idea, I saw that it was possible from Return to Zero, but I didn't know how it was done. I didn't open up the park and take a look at it. I just assumed I would be able to figure it out. And one thing you can see here is the whole track glowing blue like that. Honestly, I kind of wanted to leave it like that. Just leaving the lights and having the whole track glowing blue was quite spectacular. But I decided I would make it a triggered event because that might be cooler. So the way you gotta... I made a mistake here, so I'm going to try and teach you guys something as much as possible. I was trying to space out the triggers just kind of like every 3 lights, so that way I could trigger it perfectly. So when the coaster hits the one light, or hits the one trigger, it turns on the 3 lights, and maybe just put a 0.1 second delay, so it kind of goes along. And every time it hits one of those triggers, it's going to set off the next 3 lights. However, as I'm spreading these all out, 3 apart, 3 apart, 3 apart, you will see here very shortly I get to 50, and the game no longer allows me to put any more triggers on. And I didn't realize there was a limit. So there you go. You guys learned something already. I had to undo it all. Do not go over 50 triggers because the game will not allow you to. So I had to rethink my design here, and I started spacing them out, I think every 10 lights. So I'm just counting them. You'll see me kind of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. And luckily it's at 10 times speed, so you barely notice. I'm essentially just counting the spaces in between all 10 lights. This isn't how I would do it in the future, because while it made sense in terms of like just mathematics, just doing it every 10 lights, the way I would actually approach it in the future is doing it by sections of speed. So when the coaster is going up, it's going to be going slower, and then when it's going downhill, it's going to be going faster. So it's going to take a different length between segments to trigger those lights. So what I'm getting at here is I would essentially choose segments of the track where the coaster is running at a certain speed. So at the top of the hill, at the bottom of the hill, at the bottom of a hill, at the bottom of an inversion, at the end of an inversion. and certain segments where the coaster has a consistent speed from the start of the trigger until the next trigger. Because what ends up happening where they're all 10 spaced apart is so to cut back into what I'm doing here is I'm just adding in all the lights to the triggers. So I'm just going through, I select that 7 there, and then I'll add the lights, add the lights, add the lights, add the lights. Select that 8, add the lights, add the lights, add the lights, and we'll deal with it later. So anyways, jumping back to what I was saying, I would do it in segments, because what's happening here at certain points, it says, okay, I'm going to trigger it, but midway of the trigger, the coaster might slow down a little bit, or, you know, and then midway of another trigger, it might speed up a bit. So it has a little bit of inconsistency in terms of timing. Whereas if the coaster was the same speed from the start of the trigger to the end of the trigger, you could kind of go, okay, it takes the coaster, you know, 2 seconds to get across this segment. So I can space out all the lights at 0.2 seconds, and then they all go off at the same rate. But if halfway through those 5 triggers, the coaster starts slowing down, then the light is going to be a little bit faster than the coaster, and it's going to get ahead of the coaster. And then at other times it could get behind the coaster. So it became a little bit of an issue near the end. Nonetheless, it turned out really good, but it's not perfect. The coaster kind of follows it, and then it stops, and then it follows it, and then it stops, and it waits for the coaster to catch up, and then it follows it, and it stops, and waits for the coaster to catch up. For most of the parts, it seems pretty seamless. It's going from one to the next, to the next, to the next. But there are parts where it's just kind of like, let me hang out here for a second and wait for you to catch up to the next trigger. And it's just because of the way I space them and the speed of the track. Nonetheless, it actually works out really well, and if you did it this way like I am, the results turn out to be fairly good. So the system that I got down here is, like I said, I put like 500 lights across the whole track. I think it was about 400 or 500 lights across the whole track, all spaced out like, you know, I don't know, 5-10 feet apart. And then you know, and then I added a trigger to the track, and I spaced them out between every 10 lights. And then I ended up having like 45 different triggers, I think. So it was about 450 lights. And then I go through and I select the trigger, and then I just go add object, and I select a light, add object, I select a light. And I do that until I get to the next trigger. And then I select that trigger, and I add light, add light, add light, add light. It was a bit annoying because I had to scroll down the list every time, and it was just a really painful, tedious task. But essentially what this is going to do, now when the coaster goes down the track and it hits that trigger, all 10 of those lights are going to turn on in front of it. But that's not exactly what we want. We want them to turn on in a sequence, like a you know, we want them to have a delay. We don't want just the chunk, this whole section of the track to turn on, chunk, the next section of the track turns on. We want it to follow the coaster. So when I was saying there was a little bit of problem in terms of how I segregated the track sections, I would do that differently next time. So some sections might have 15-20 lights, other sections might just have 5 lights depending on the speed of the coaster. I would really just go through and watch the coaster and see how fast it's going. So quick test run here. You guys will see this is just like it's bonk 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 bonk. This is like it's just turning on the sections of the track. So sorry about this. This is a 10 times speed, a little bit jarring, I know that. And then I realized from looking at that the lights were not staying on long enough. So I have to go in, you can set a duration to each one of the lights on how long you want it to stay on after it's been triggered. So I had to go through this one by one and select them all and change the duration from 3 seconds to 5 seconds. And so I'm just going through, copy paste. You can actually copy the number 5 and just hit Control C to copy the number and then Control V to paste the number. So I'm just selecting it and going Control V, Control V, Control V, Control V, and that's kind of how you can get it done efficiently. Yeah, so what was I saying before that? Yeah, I would look at the heat maps and the speed of the coaster and try and figure out, segregate the different sections in terms of speed. So as it's coming up this giant long hill here, that would be one section. And then it gets to the top, it starts gaining speed, and it gets to the bottom, that would be one section here. Then it's going up again to the top. It's probably all going at the same speed, and it stops about here. Then I would start another one that goes through this whole little inversion down in. And it's going to gain more speed. So I would go through them, and then as soon as it starts going up again, I would create a new trigger because it's going to slow down. And then at the end, when it starts going down, I'd create another one. So the sections, how I would do it in the future, would be based off of just how fast the coaster's going. So some of the sections might be 15 feet long, some of them might be 100 feet long. As long as the coaster stays the same speed the whole way through, it's actually easy to do. And there would be a lot less triggers throughout the whole thing, I believe, because as long as the coaster is maintaining the same speed throughout a whole, 50-foot section of the track, that's actually pretty easy to do, because if it takes 50 seconds to get from point A to point B, then you just divide that by how many lights there are, essentially. And then you know how many seconds to separate them by. So for example, if it's 50 feet and 10 lights, then and it takes 5 seconds to get across of it, doing the math real quickly, you would you'd space them out by 0.5. Yeah, something like that. So and then the coaster would, each one of the lights would, yeah, it's just a mathematical equation essentially. I often, that's a bad example, but essentially, yeah, you would take the length of the track and divide it by, or sorry, you take how long it takes to get point A to B and divide it by how many lights there are. And then that number, you would use that number and add a decimal point to it, so 0.0 that number, and that would be the spacing between your delays. So if you add those delays up from the first light to the last light, that equals the length of the coaster reaching point A to B, if that makes sense. So I was just testing this, and I went through them all, and I was just kind of adding like a small little delay between them just to see how things worked. And then that didn't quite work either, because like I said, sometimes the coaster speeds up and sometimes it slows down. So some sections, because they're all spaced out by 10 lights, sometimes the coaster is faster between those 10 lights. Sometimes it's slower between those 2 lights. So I had to go through after and kind of go, okay, from trigger 3 to 4, it takes, 2 seconds to get through there. All right, so I'll space all 10 lights out at 0.2, because 0.2 times 10 is 2 seconds. So if the coaster takes 4 seconds to get from 0.7 to 0.8, then we're going to space them out by 0.4. And so I was just kind of going 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, and seeing how long it takes to get from that point to that point. And it's not perfect. Generally, each section was about 1 to 2 seconds. And then there were there was the odd exception that were 3 or 4 seconds for like really, like going up the big Yeti cliff. That took a while, took about 3 or 4 seconds. So if the delay was set by 0.4, as it's coming up, it'd be like turning it on, turning it on, turning it on. But like I said, there might be a point where it's going a little bit fast for those first couple lights, and then it slows down, which that's where it starts becoming problematic, because you'd have to delay. It's easier just to set the whole section based off of, like I said earlier, time from point A to B divided by how many lights there are. So rather than going, okay, the first 5 lights are delayed at 0.1, and then we got to delay them by 0.3 for the last 5, that gets a little bit too complicated. You want to try and simplify things as much as possible. That's why I don't recommend just spacing them out by every 10 lights and then a trigger, 10 lights and a trigger, because your coaster's going at various speeds. So I'd separate it by the speed of the coaster. I'm sort of repeating myself, but I'm trying to explain this as best as possible, and without creating any confusion. So I'm just kind of reconfirming my thoughts here. So yeah, it's a bit of a tricky situation, and the way I did it actually works, just counting to see how long it goes from 35 to 34, and then space, if it takes 2 seconds, you space it all out by 0.2. And it makes the math really easy doing it this way, because if it takes 3 seconds to go from point C to D, then it's just 0.3 between each light. However, like I said, if there's little moments where it's speeding up or slowing down, the light's not going to be perfectly in sync with the coaster. But you can't really notice it. I think throughout the whole track, you guys will get to ride it in a second here. Let me see here. Is this it? Oh, this is it. All right, so you guys got to see it. Yeah, sorry there's no sound though, because I was listening to a podcast when I did this. So I'll just put some music on and you guys can see how it follows the track here. And yeah, it's doing a pretty good job, generally. At some points you'll see it like kind of stop. At this point, the coaster got a little bit ahead of it. That was like the one spot I don't like. I might go back and clean that up. But generally it's going along, and you'll see it slow down just a little bit and wait for the coaster, and it hits a trigger and it continues again. And it's waiting, and it hits the next trigger and it continues. There's this little tiny delays. It's going to stop and then it's going to go. And see, it's waiting for us. Just because, like I said, the coaster speeds up and it slows down. But generally, it works really well. I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out and the way it looks. And with the 5-second delay, it does a really cool tail effect as well. The lights are slowly disappearing behind the coaster. So that's a pretty neat effect as well. Yeah, but essentially we have a coaster that lights up in front of us as we travel along, which is pretty cool. And like I said, it's not perfect. There are little delays, like it's going to wait there for us and then catch up. So it has a little bit of a rubber band effect where it waits and it goes and it waits and it goes. And like I said, if we did it by sections, we could almost get it seamless where there is no delay and it's a perfect snake from start to finish, and you don't see it catching up with itself. You don't see it pausing. And the way to do that would be essentially to calculate the segments based off of speed instead of counting it based off of the number of lights. So this is a learning process. I'm not going to like scrap the whole system because it took me 5 hours to figure this thing out. But at the end of that 5 hours, I learned what needed to be done. So I kind of know now how I would do this in the future. And now I'm explaining it to you guys, so you guys kind of know how it should be done. And I'm just taking another look at it so you can see it from a different perspective and how it runs along the track here. And it's waiting, and then it hits that trigger and it begins. At one point right here, the coaster gets a little bit ahead of it, so we might have to clean that up. But it's not too bad. I mean, still a really cool effect. It's better than not having it. And you can see how the other lights are catching up behind it, which is pretty cool. And it's going up the pretzel. I mean, it worked out pretty good. Like I said, it's not perfect, but generally it was a learning process. And like I said, I think it's better having it the way it is than not having it at all. And in the future, based off of what I've explained, if you calculate the speed of the coaster on each segment and you put a trigger in between the fluctuations of the speed and then just take the length of that coaster and divide it by how many lights there are, that's your delay. And then you'll have a perfect light stream that has no little hiccups. It doesn't stall like it's waiting for it. It's going to stop right here and wait for the coaster to catch up, hit the next light. Those tiny little, I'd say, bumps in the light, in the little delays, that can be ironed out if you do it by speed sections rather than by the count of the lights. However, doing it by the count of the lights is the easiest way to do it. So if you're looking to do this method, you could probably do it in less than 5 hours, because I was experimenting. Like I said, I put all the lights down and then deleted them all, or sorry, the triggers. While you're placing the lights, you might want to have them auto set to 5 seconds. You don't have to go in and add them all after. And I mean, yeah, the whole thing was an experimentation process. If I were to do it the same way again next time, I could do this all in just a few hours. And this is a long, long track. So I guess we got to take another look at it here. So it's a very long track, and you know, it only took me 5 hours to set it up, but that's with the experimentation. So knowing what I know now, and just if you were to replicate this, doing it the same way I did, 10 lights and a trigger, 10 lights and a trigger, you could get through it pretty quickly. Just make sure you have all of them set at 5-second durations instead of 3, because you don't want to have to go and select all the lights after, because I felt like 3 was a little bit too short. And then and you should be good to go. And if you want to do it the perfect way, I've already explained how to do that by segments of speed, and then that'll get you the best results. But that would also require a lot more calculation in between sections. You'd have to probably grab a calculator and do some math in between each section and plan it a little bit more methodically, and it would take a lot longer to do. But now I know that it's possible to do, and how I would approach doing that if I wanted it to be perfect. So if you're kind of like, I like this effect where the light follows the track, and maybe you want to use different colors like red, blue, and green, and have like a rainbow road effect, or different sections, you could do it the way I did it here, and it still gives you a pretty good result, and it's just a nice added element to any coaster, I think, lighting it up like that. And you could just do it to certain sections instead, like maybe it's going through a cave and you want the whole track to light up, and you just do it to that one section, and that won't take you long at all. You essentially just put a trigger point, put 10 lights down, and then space them all 0.2 seconds apart, and then there you go, it's done. Super easy to do. Doing a whole coaster like this is where it gets tricky and mathematically heavy. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this episode. It wasn't the craziest, but we got our lights working, and we got, you know, a nice little effect. I think it's nice having this glow following the track of Darla. It just really adds. Here we're going to see on fast forward, you see this like glowing, you know, blue neon stripe just whizzing along the track, and it looks super cool. I like that. It's like this magical blue dust just carries across the track. So it definitely takes Darla over just being a generic torque coaster. Well, I mean, it's not too generic. It's pretty explorative, and it has a lot of crazy. It's a pretty crazy coaster, but we want it to be an exceptionally crazy coaster. So I think that really helps it take it over the top, and hopefully I explained it properly to you guys. I know you didn't get to see it quite being hooked up properly, but it's super easy. You go into your triggers, you add a trigger, and then you select the item, or the light, and then set a delay in between each one, and it's done. Essentially, it's really easy to do. The tricky part is when you have lots and lots of track and different speeds throughout it, but as I explained, that's not too hard to fix if you have a whole bunch of it's not too hard to fix if you have the patience. And then so that's going to do it for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you guys so much for watching. Before we go, the next episode we're going to be doing custom supports for Darla, which actually turns out to be really cool. We might have to 10 times speed that as well, but oh my god, I'm so happy with the results. Excuse me. And it's really awesome, so hopefully you guys enjoy that as well. I mean, I didn't really want to show off this episode today, guys, because it seemed kind of boring, but I tried to do my best at making it entertaining, so hopefully you guys learned something. Hopefully you guys got some ideas for your own coasters in the future. Maybe you like this idea. Hopefully it's not too complicated. I think the process and the logic behind it is actually pretty simple, and the way I did it makes it even easier. But part of me wants to do it the proper way. So I told you guys how to do that, and hopefully you learned something. Anyways, yeah, that's it for this episode for the second time. And thank you guys so much for watching. If you like, please be sure to smash that like button. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe for more daily Planet Coaster videos. Let me know what you guys think of this down in the comments below. And stay tuned for the next episode, guys. All right, see you everybody.